Curse of the Kichai Shaman. Chapter 5. A Curse Unleashed. David was then sent to Caddo County, Oklahoma with 3 other archaeologists from United Environmental Solutions. They were to help the archaeologists of the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, or ODOT. They were widening U.S. Highway 281 in an area surrounded by Wichita tribal lands that traversed an area known for its cultural significance. Part of the area was said to be a burial ground. David was in Oklahoma with Dan Fields, Cindy Velez, and Peter Muriel from United Environmental Solutions, and they all were staying at the Castle Inn and Suites. The job site was just down Central Boulevard and to the right. David stopped at a Conoco on the corner of Highway 281 to get some sports drinks and lunch for his cooler. He had gotten ice for it at the hotel. David noticed inside the Conoco was a bulletin board, and pinned to it were 2 flyers of missing Native American women. He read the flyers, and they both said that their cars were found abandoned. He bought 6 Body Armor mango sports drinks and a pre-made sandwich and headed out to work. The first thing they were tasked with was digging test holes every 10 meters for a 2-mile stretch of highway where the road would be widened during this phase of construction. That is 321 test holes, and David had to dig approximately 80 of them. He geolocated the spot where the hole was to be dug, assigned the hole a number, dug the hole and screened the dirt, then bagged all the items found and labeled the bag with the hole number, and moved on. It took them just 5 days to complete this assignment, putting them 2 days ahead of schedule. By the time David and his team completed the test holes, the ODOT archaeologists had already started excavating sites that the test holes had identified. Before the team from United Environmental Solutions that David was on were allowed to dig in any units in any of the features that had recently been identified, the ODOT archaeologists held a meeting to go over the ground rules. They were told to geolocate everything that was found in any feature and log it in a notebook. Then enter the data from their notebooks into the database at the end of the day. If they identified human remains, they were to turn over the unit to an ODOT archaeologist and let them do the excavation. The identified features were rich with artifacts, and the units that David dug began to yield interesting items. The first day, the unit he was on yielded the bottom of a fired clay pot. The second day, he found the bottom of another fired clay pot and a bone awl that was worn smooth from use. Then, the third day, he found 2 pieces of a pipe bowl that fit together. David geolocated and logged everything like he was told. The richness of these sites exhilarated him. On the 4th day, he was digging in his unit, and he found a fired clay disc which was peeking out of the ground as he dug. They always dug down 10 centimeters at a time as they moved through a unit. On the next pass, the clay disc was found to be connected to the rest of a fired clay pot. The disc on top was sealing it closed. After 2 more 10-centimeter passes, most of the pot was exposed. David was stunned. He did not know what to think. The pot had the same type markings on it as the pot on the figurine he had found in the wall of the house over 3 years ago. Also, this was the pot that he had recurring dreams about. For the first time as an archaeologist, he began to have an uneasy feeling. He felt as if someone was watching him, but he continued with another pass and had uncovered the whole pot, which now sat on a pedestal of dirt, as was the technique used when digging archaeological units. As he continued this pass of digging, he uncovered a small bone. Next to it was another. He uncovered enough to see that this was a human hand. He suffered a bout of déjà vu. He remembered the dream he had years ago where a skeleton hand grabbed onto his arm, and as he pulled away, the rest of the skeleton began to come out of the ground. This time, the hand did not animate. It just lay there, but still David was shaken. He stopped digging and immediately went and told the chief ODOT archaeologist that he had discovered human remains. The chief ODOT archaeologist came to David's unit and confirmed that they were human remains. He told David he had done a good job and called an ODOT archaeologist named Richard to come and excavate the burial. David was assigned to a unit nearby and told to keep digging. Again, David was told he did a good job, but for some reason he felt uneasy with the whole situation. David was digging in his new unit, but he could not stop watching Richard. Richard was odd. He had unnatural black hair that almost looked blue, the same way that a grackle bird looks in the sun. He also had large, black-gauged earplug tunnels that were almost a half-inch in diameter and full-sleeve tattoos with what looked like ancient Egyptian gods on them. Prominently on his forearm was the god Anubis with the head of a jackal. David was not a judgmental person and had a few tattoos himself, predominantly a large cross and rose on his upper arm. But something about Richard made him feel uneasy. Still, he found himself constantly looking in Richard's direction. The fact that he had just experienced a déjà vu episode and had dreamed about that pot several times had him feeling paranoid. He kept occasionally checking in on the progress Richard was making. Richard had uncovered the hand and arm, and there were copper bands found at the wrist and at the upper arm. The presence of copper bands meant that the burial was not ancient but historical, and was most likely from the 1800s. That night, David was in his hotel room at the Castle Inn in Anadarko, Oklahoma. He was having trouble sleeping, and it took a long time for him to drift off, but eventually he was asleep. Then he was watching Richard excavating the skeleton next to the familiar fired clay pot that was on a pedestal of dirt. David saw the pedestal of dirt start to crumble and the pot began to lean. David jumped up and yelled at Richard. "Watch out, it is falling!" he shouted. The pot then tumbled off the pile of dirt and the seal broke open and black debris fell out, followed by a smoky vapor that rose mysteriously out of the pot and dissipated into the air. Richard looked at David and started laughing. The laughing got louder as David's vision failed. Suddenly, David was awake in his hotel room. He had been dreaming. He lay awake the rest of the night, unable to sleep. Up until that night, he had loved his job, but now he was beginning to feel uneasy about it all. That morning, David got in his truck and drove the short distance to where they were working next to the highway. He parked his truck just off the highway in a field that the ODOT archaeologists had designated as a parking area. He made his way to the unit he was assigned and got to work. Richard was back and continued to excavate the skeleton. By the end of the day, David had finished his unit and had moved over to the next unit. He could still see Richard working on the skeleton, and the whole body was now uncovered. The chief ODOT archaeologist came up to David at the end of the day and told him, "It looks like you found a chief or shaman of very high status. He was covered with beaded jewelry and copper arm and wristbands. Also, this is not an ancient burial. It looks to be historical and rather recent." David was thinking that he should be thrilled with the news, but he still felt uneasy about it all. He went to the tables that were set up under the canopy where the laptop computers were that they logged in their finds for that day. He had found 3 pieces of a broken pot. They were ancient, yet were found near the historical high-status skeleton from the 1800s. This must have been a burial ground used for centuries. It was now September 1st, but the heat of August was still present. David, now finished for the day, went and got in his truck. It was hot inside. He leaned over and rolled down the passenger side window. Then he rolled down the window on the driver's side to let the built-up heat out. He started his truck and blasted the air conditioning to full and quickly pulled out on the highway so that he could get moving and circulate the air. He started to feel like he was falling asleep. He felt his head nod off, but quickly regained his composure and put his head out the window, hoping the breeze would keep him awake. He had never just nodded off like that driving. Soon the tired feeling passed, and he made it the mile or so to his hotel. The next day at work, David began digging in his unit and almost immediately found a bone that looked possibly human. He went and got the chief ODOT archaeologist, and it was confirmed to be a human burial. Again, the chief archaeologist put Richard on the exhumation, so David was moved to another unit, and again he found a human bone. He again went and got the chief archaeologist, and again it was confirmed to be human. They put another ODOT archaeologist on this site as well. So, David was put in another unit nearby, and after about an hour he found still another human bone. This was confirmed by the chief ODOT archaeologist. This time, they did not have a spare ODOT archaeologist, so the chief let David uncover a bit more of it just so they could get the orientation of the skeleton. He had found 3 human skeletons in one day and 5 pieces of broken pottery. The team had uncovered an ancient native cemetery beside the highway. David sat under the canopy and logged the GPS coordinates of all his finds and was about to leave. The chief ODOT archaeologist came up to David and said that they were all going out to eat at Joe's Burgers and Steaks in Anadarko to celebrate the finding of the ancient burial site and invited David. He said he would love to come along. David went to his truck. Again, it was hot, and he rolled down the windows to get the heat out. And again, he started his truck, blasted the air conditioner, and pulled out on the highway. And again, he felt like he was going to nod off, but he put his head out the window in the breeze and eventually felt better. That evening, David met the other archaeologists at Joe's Burgers and Steaks. The staff had pushed 3 tables into a long line, and David was made to sit at the head of this table. The chief ODOT archaeologist was on the right side of David, and Richard was on the left side of him. The chief ODOT archaeologist said he was going to pay for David and tried to get him to get a steak, but David got a burger instead. David drank all his soda and ordered another one. Toward the end of the meal, he went to the bathroom. He came back, finished his second soda, and started to drive back to the hotel. He felt groggy while driving. It was different from the times he had left work and almost nodded off. He felt drunk, though he did not drink. He made it to his hotel and called Helene to tell her about the last few days. She asked if he was okay because he was slurring his words. He said he was all right, and that he must be just exhausted from the excitement of the last few days. He went to bed and fell asleep immediately. David woke up suddenly. He was in his hotel room, and it was Friday morning. After today, there was only 1 more week scheduled for the archaeological survey along Highway 281. He got ready for work. He had been taking a cooler with sports drinks to work with him because of the heat. He was out of them. He left early so he could stop at a store and get some more. Before he left, he went to the ice machine at the hotel and put some ice in his cooler. He went to the Conoco gas station just down East Central Boulevard on the corner of Highway 281 and bought a 6-pack of Body Armor mango sports drinks and put them in his cooler. He then went down Highway 281 the short distance to his work site. At work, he was assigned to a new unit in the center of where most of the human remains had been found. He began to dig his first pass at the prescribed depth of 10 centimeters when he found a pot shard. He geolocated the broken pottery and kept digging. He then uncovered a bone that he thought was human, so he went and got the chief ODOT archaeologist to confirm this. The chief said it looks like a femur of a leg and pulled David off the unit and placed Richard there to exhume the skeleton. The chief moved David to a new unit farther away from where they were finding human remains. In this new unit, he again found some bones, but they proved to be bison vertebrae and not human, so he was allowed to stay on the unit the rest of the day. At the end of the day, he took his notebook over to the canopy area where there were tables and laptops set up for the archaeologists to log their finds into the database. This is also the area where he kept his cooler, and he got a Body Armor mango sports drink out, cracked it open, and started drinking it. Richard then came over to him and sat down in a chair beside him while he was on the laptop. Richard started talking to David and was in a jovial mood. Richard said, "You have found so many skeletons that we are beginning to think you buried them there." He was happy and telling David what a good job he was doing. David had to pee. He said, "Excuse me," and went to one of the portable toilets nearby. When he got back to the canopy area, Richard had moved to a laptop at another table, but he was just sitting there with a serious look on his face. He was no longer jovial. David finished up entering his data and drank the rest of his Body Armor mango drink, grabbed his cooler, and went to his truck. Again, it was a hot day. David rolled the windows down, started his truck, and blasted the air conditioner. As he was driving off, he realized that he was not nodding off like he had been that last few days. He drove down Highway 281 towards Anadarko. As he was coming into town, he started to feel intoxicated. He turned onto East Central Boulevard and was having trouble maintaining his lane. When he was just down the road from his hotel, he saw red and blue police lights behind him. He was getting pulled over by the police. He pulled to the side of the road. The police car stopped behind him and sat there a while. The police officer was running his license tag. David rolled his window down and started looking for his insurance card. He pulled out his driver's license from his wallet in preparation. He was feeling strange, like he was really drunk. After a while, the officer exited his car and went up to David's driver's side window. The police officer said, "I am Officer Whitehorse from the Anadarko Police Department. The reason I stopped you is you were failing to maintain your lane. Have you been drinking today?" David said, "No, I don't drink." Officer Whitehorse then asked for his driver's license and insurance, which David handed him, and he went back to his police car to run them on his computer. After a few minutes, Officer Whitehorse came back and said, "Your license is clear, but I have reason to believe that you might be intoxicated. Your eyes are glassy, and you are slurring your words. Will you submit to a few field sobriety tests?" David said, "Sure, I will." Officer Whitehorse then said, "Please exit your vehicle and let's get out of traffic and move to the parking lot over there where we will be safe." David got out of his truck and went over to the parking lot. He was having trouble walking in a straight line, but he made it over to Officer Whitehorse. Officer Whitehorse told David to stand in front of him. He then told David, "The first test we will do is the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. Do you have any problems with your eyes?" David said, "No." Officer Whitehorse then told David to focus on the tip of his pen and follow it with his eyes and not to move his head. He began to move the pen slowly to the left, then slowly to the right. He did this for about 2 full minutes until he was satisfied. David did his best to follow the pen with his eyes and did not move his head, but Officer Whitehorse detected his eyes jerking well before he got to 45 degrees of angle. The next test was the walk and turn. Officer Whitehorse explained the test and told him not to start before he said to. He then asked David if he understood, and David said, "Yes." He then told David to begin. David tried to put one foot in front of the other and walk the prescribed 9 steps, but he was having trouble balancing and constantly had to bring his arms up from his sides to balance. Officer Whitehorse then explained the last test, which was the one-legged stand. Again, he told David to listen to all the directions first and then to only start when he told him to. He explained that David had to stand on one leg of his choice and raise his foot 6 inches off the ground and point his toe. Then he was to count to 30. David could not stand on one leg for more than a few seconds before he had to raise his arms to balance and put his foot down. After the tests were completed, Officer Whitehorse said that he was convinced that David was intoxicated and told him to put his hands behind his back because he was being arrested for operating while intoxicated. David said that he thinks a guy named Richard put something in his sports drink at the end of the day at work. Officer Whitehorse had David's truck towed and drove him to the Anadarko City Jail. At the jail, he had David wait 15 minutes and then gave him a breathalyzer which was negative for alcohol. Officer Whitehorse asked him if he had taken any drugs, and again, David said he thought that a guy named Richard put something in his sports drink. Officer Whitehorse then asked David if he would submit to a blood test at the hospital. David agreed. Officer Whitehorse was driving David to the physician's hospital for a blood draw, and David fell asleep in the back of his patrol car, and he had to wake David up when they got to the hospital. At the hospital, they told them that the test results would be available at the end of the day on Monday. It was about 6 p.m. on Friday at the time. Officer Whitehorse took David back to the Anadarko City Jail and put him in the drunk tank, which was a cell for intoxicated people. In the cell were two young men that looked to be in their 20s. They also looked to be Native Americans. David went in and sat on the bench across the cell from the two young men. One of the young men was laying on the bench and seemed to be asleep, but the other young man was awake and sitting up. The young man sitting up asked David, "What did they pin on you?" David, still feeling intoxicated and trying to be friendly, said, "A guy at work spiked my drink with something, and I was pulled over for operating while intoxicated and brought here." The young man said, "Really? Where do you work?" David said, "Right now on the side of Highway 281. Why are you here?" The young man said, "Me and my cousin here were arrested for public intoxication. We were just walking down the street minding our own business. We were not bothering anybody. Officer Crosby just has it in for me." "What are you doing on the highway?" David told him, "We are preserving cultural sites before the highway is widened so they don't get destroyed in the construction process. I am an archaeologist." The young man asked, "Are you digging up graves? Because that can be very dangerous for you. You could get cursed." Just then, the other young man who was laying down opened his eyes, looked at David and said, "It is too late for him. His aura has many colors. He is already under a curse."